There was a night, 200 years ago, when a Norwegian sailor saw something emerge from the ocean. Something so large, so dark, and so impossible that when he returned to port, no one believed him. And yet, that sailor was right. Every monster humanity has invented, every creature that has haunted its nightmares for centuries, has a root planted in the real world, in flesh, in bones, in history, or in the broken mind of a human being who did things no beast could have imagined. Today you're going to discover what lies behind the world's most famous legends. Not the movie version, the real version. And I'm warning you now, the real thing is much more disturbing. Part 1. The meat behind the myth. Monsters exist because humans cannot tolerate the inexplicable. Yes, when the brain encounters something that doesn't fit into any known category, it doesn't dismiss it, it amplifies it, it turns it into legend. It surrounds it with teeth, scales, and curses. A massive bone on a Greek hillside wasn't a mammoth's femur, it was a cyclops' femur. A 7-meter-long reptile in an African river wasn't a crocodile, it was a dragon. Humans weren't lying, they simply didn't have any other vocabulary. Let's start with the Kraken, the most terrifying creature in the Nordic maritime imagination. A colossal octopus capable of sinking entire ships. For centuries it was pure superstition. Until, in 1857, the Danish zoologist Japetus Steenstrup described Architeuthis ducks, the real giant squid, 14 meters long, eyes the size of a basketball, depths of between 200 and 1,000 meters. Its tentacles leave circular scars on the skin of the sperm whales it fights in the dark. The 18th century Norwegian sailors who described a creature emerging from the water and dragging ships weren't hallucinating. They were seeing something real. It's just that no one had a name for it yet. The dragon is the most universal monster in history. It appears in China, in medieval Europe, in Mesopotamia, in Aztec mythology. Cultures with no contact with each other, inventing the exact same creature. The answer lies in the bones. The paleontological sites of the ancient world were full of dinosaur fossils that no one knew how to identify. A Protoceratops skull in the Gobi Desert was probably the origin of the griffin. To this we must add two real species, the Nile crocodile, 6 meters long and with a bite force of 2,000 kilograms, and the Komodo dragon, discovered by the West only in 1910, 3 meters long with anticoagulant venom reaching speeds of 30 kilometers per hour. If you were a 15th century Portuguese sailor and saw that for the first time, you wouldn't call it a lizard, you'd call it a dragon. The unicorn has a sadder history. The first written record doesn't come from medieval tales, but from the Greek physician Ctesias of Cnidus in the 5th century BC, describing a single-horned animal white as milk, impossible to capture. It was probably the Arabian oryx seen in profile, but the most impressive candidate is the Elasmotherium sibericum, a giant Eurasian rhinoceros that went extinct just 39,000 years ago. 2-meter-long central horn, 2.5 meters tall, 5 tons. There is genetic evidence that it coexisted with modern humans. The unicorn could be the last echo of a collective memory of something that truly existed. The origin of mermaids is anything but magical. The first documented report isn't in Homer, but in Christopher Columbus's logbook, dated January 9th, 1493. Columbus wrote, "I saw 3 mermaids that rose high out of the sea, but they were not as beautiful as they are depicted." What he saw were manatees, and what makes this report valuable is his disappointment. A man expecting a creature of supernatural beauty and seeing a fat, clumsy mammal. The problem wasn't his eyesight, it was his state of mind. Long-distance sailors suffered from scurvy, sleep deprivation, and clinically documented hallucinations. The dugong and the manatee, with their females nursing in a semi-vertical position, were enough to complete the picture for a dehydrated brain. The roc, the flying beast of 1001 Nights capable of lifting elephants, had a real-life counterpart. The Epiornis maximus of Madagascar, 3 meters tall, 700 kilograms, the largest bird that ever existed. Its eggs, 160 times larger than a chicken egg, were found by Arab sailors on the shores of Madagascar. Marco Polo mentions the roc. Ibn Battuta does too. The Apiornis became extinct in the 17th century due to hunting, which means there were people who saw it alive. People whose stories traveled along Arab trade routes and ended up as the bird that darkens the sun. If you thought monsters were just fantasy until now, the unsettling part has just begun. Like this if you want us to keep unmasking the legends. And subscribe is because in the next part, the monster will have a name and a human face. Part 2. The monster had a name and an address. There is something that has disturbed our species from the beginning and has never ceased to disturb us. The idea that the true monster has neither scales nor tentacles. The idea that the true monster has a human face. It can speak, it can smile, And in some of the cases we are about to discuss, it was the ruler of a country, Dracula. Bram Stoker's novel created one of the most enduring archetypes in Western culture. But the fictional Count Dracula borrowed only the name and geography from a real man who was, in many ways, far more terrifying. Vlad III of Wallachia, the Impaler, ruled what is now Romania in the 15th century. That is his method of execution, driving a stake through the condemned person's body with enough care to avoid immediately damaging vital organs, so that the victim would take hours or days to die. His estimated victims, between 40,000 and 100,000 people. Turkish and German chronicles describe banquets held surrounded by thousands of impaled bodies in various stages of decomposition. A Turkish embassy came to negotiate with him and was forced to dine in such an environment. Sultan Mehmed II, who had captured Constantinople, turned back and did not attack. The real Dracula didn't need fangs. He had something worse: efficiency. The werewolf has a genuinely disturbing medical history. The most famous case is that of Peter Stump, tried in Bedburg, Germany in 1589. A is accused of multiple murders and of having transformed into a wolf thanks to a magic belt. The trial ended in a public execution that was disseminated throughout Europe in illustrated pamphlets. But behind this lie two medical explanations. Hypertrichosis, the werewolf syndrome, causes excessive hair growth all over the body, including the face, in a dense and uniform manner. Erythropoietic porphyria causes extreme sensitivity to sunlight. Receding gums that expose the teeth, giving them a fang-like appearance, and a reddish discoloration of the teeth due to porphyrin accumulation. Imagine a person with porphyria who could only go out at night, with red teeth and a beastly appearance in rural Germany in the 16th century. You don't need to imagine what happened to him in the next village he reached. Like Frankenstein involves not one, but several real people. Frankenstein Castle exists in Mühltal, Germany. Johann Conrad Dippel, an alchemist who experimented on human corpses, created an oil distilled from human bones and tissue, and was expelled from multiple territories for his activities, was born there in 1673. Mary Shelley passed near the castle in 1814, 2 years before writing the novel. But the second element is even more disturbing. In January 1803, in London, the scientist Giovanni Aldini connected electrical wires to the recently executed corpse of the murderer, George Forster. Before a room full of doctors and the public, the corpse opened an eye, raised a hand, and contracted its facial muscles. The Times covered the event. Aldini claimed that with the correct voltage, reanimation was possible. Mary Shelley was 16 years old when this happened. It's no coincidence. Jack the Ripper is the first modern human monster. Between August and November 1888 in Whitechapel, 5 women were murdered and mutilated with such precision that forensic expert Thomas Bond concluded the killer possessed advanced anatomical knowledge. The murderer was never definitively identified, though suspects included artist Walter Sickert, Polish barber Aaron Kosminski, and Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria. His significance lies not only in the crimes themselves. The Ripper was the first to have an alias, the first to communicate with the public, the first to generate an industry of fascination that, 130 years later, continues to produce books, series, and theories. He was proof that pure evil can walk among us unseen. You need to close this section, the most chilling collective case, the Salem witch trials. In 1692, 19 people were executed after being accused of witchcraft. It all began with the symptoms of a handful of girls who exhibited convulsions, visions, and a burning sensation. The official explanation at the time: demonic possession, the one that science proposes today: ergotism. Claviceps purpurea is a fungus that grows on damp rye and produces ergot, the alkaloid from which LSD is derived. The summer of 1691 in Salem was exceptionally wet. The grain store was contaminated. The symptoms of ergotism, intense visual hallucinations and convulsions, are clinically identical to what the girls described. The monster of Salem was not animal-shaped. It was both a fungus and an institution. If you think humans are more terrifying than any beast, wait until you see what science still can't explain. Subscribe now, because in the last part, we won't talk about myths. We'll talk about what's still out there. Part 3. What science still can't explain. So far, we've talked about closed cases where science arrived late, but arrived nonetheless. Now we enter different territory, cases that science has investigated with the most advanced tools of the 21st century, and that it still hasn't been able to solve. And this, believe me, is the most unsettling thing of all. The Yeti underwent the most rigorous genetic study in its history in 2014 by Oxford geneticist Brian Sykes. 36 hair samples attributed to the Yeti were analyzed, along with complete mitochondrial DNA sequencing. The result was surprising. Most belonged to bears, wolves, and other known mammals. But 2 samples, and one from the Himalayas and the other from Tibet, matched genetically with an ancestral polar bear from over 40,000 years ago, possibly an unknown hybrid that could still exist in the most remote areas of the Himalayas. Sykes published his findings in Proceedings of the Royal Society B. He didn't claim that the Yeti existed, but he opened a door that wasn't expected to be opened. The footprints photographed by Eric Shipton on the Menlung Glacier in 1951, 33 centimeters long, with an opposable thumb morphology that doesn't correspond to any known animal in the region, remain unexplained. The Loch Ness Monster has the most documented hoax case in cryptozoology. The 1934 surgeon's photograph was declared a fake in 1994 by the grandson of one of its creators, a toy submarine with a clay head. Case closed, right? In 2018, a high-resolution sonar detected an 8-meter object in the depths of the loch that made an evasive movement upon detecting the equipment. It was not identified. In 2019, the University of Otago analyzed environmental DNA from Loch Ness at multiple depths. Result: no reptile. But they found a disproportionate amount of European eel DNA, including traces that would correspond to unusually large specimens. The European eel can reach 2 meters in length. No one has ruled out the possibility that, in the depths, under the right conditions, 5 or 6 meter eels could exist. Seen from a wooden boat in the darkness, on the surface of the loch, that looks pretty much like a monster. The megalodon is the case that most divides scientists and the public. Carcharodon megalodon, 18 to 20 meters long, 50 to 70 tons. That's the largest shark that ever existed. Extinct, according to the consensus, 3.5 million years ago. However, in 1875, the HMS Challenger expedition found megalodon teeth on the Pacific floor, originally estimated to be less than 11,000 years old. That dating has been revised and questioned, but the debate has a more serious dimension. 95% of the ocean floor remains unexplored, and the Greenland shark reminds us that we shouldn't be too certain about what can survive in the depths. 500 years of life, 7 meters long, waters below 2,000 meters, and a documented diet that includes polar bears. No one knew it existed until the 20th century, and here we come to the end. But not the end of the questions. Monsters are mirrors. That each era creates precisely the monsters it needs to externalize its deepest fears. The Middle Ages created vampires and werewolves because the central fear was the body, disease, the corruption of the flesh. The 19th century created Frankenstein because the fear was science gone awry. The 20th century created the chupacabra and aliens because the fear was the loss of control, something that watches us, but we don't see it. And the 21st century, it's already creating its own monsters. Algorithms that decide what you think without your knowledge. Lab-created viruses whose origin no one can confirm. Artificial intelligences that learn faster than the human brain can keep up. Corporations too big to have a face. In 300 years, someone will look for the real monster behind the legend, and the monster they're going to find is us. The final question has no right answer, but it does carry weight. What monster of today will be the myth of tomorrow? If this video made you see the world differently, give it a like and subscribe. Every notification you turn on is a sign that the monster of indifference hasn't won yet. See you in the next one.